Recently, we've seen a huge uptick in Lifeline's pick rate, taking her from one of the least picked legends to the 8th place, with her pick rate steadily climbing. But why is that? Lifeline hasn't received any changes in the middle of the season, and the last patch had only some slight tweaks with Season 13, but nothing that will bolster such a massive increase in her pick rate. Remember that when Lifeline received this patch, her pick rate skyrocketed to higher than it is today, but it fell off completely with Season 14, as this was when Newcastle received some huge buff, turning him to a high tier pick. He is literally Lifeline, but better in almost every single way, and this buff was enough to push her out of the meta. So what could be the reason for Lifeline's comeback? We've seen a random uptick with one legend coming into the meta unexpectedly like this before, and that was with Seer. And funny enough, it appears that Seer somehow manages to be one of the main reasons as to why Lifeline's becoming more viable as well. If you aren't sure why Seer is meta, you could simply say that it's because of the wall hacks and his overtune abilities, but diving into it, he found his way into the meta as a counter to the Gibraltar meta, which had been dominating high-level Apex for years. You see, while Maggie does provide a way to pop Gibraltar's bubble, that counter is bound to her ultimate, and the Resurrect kit doesn't necessarily provide enough utility to the rest of her team to make her as viable, but Seer has the means of cancelling the bubble revive, because if a team is playing the bubble, there's no way to dodge the Seer tactical without stepping out of said bubble, and even more so out of his tactical, meaning it's a direct counter to Gibraltar, making Gibraltar less of a viable pick. Not only that, but Seer has a constant passive wall-hack ability, and the ultimate feeds constant information to Seer and his team during the ultimate's duration, making it very hard to third party or just engage in a fight. But the thing is, while his scan cancels revives, it doesn't cancel lifelines. So moving on, the team E6, and if you don't know them, they have Slayers, who at one point was the #1 predator in the previous seasons, have been continuing to use Lifeline both in ranked, scrims, and even in competitive Apex. The Lifeline makes perfect sense as a direct counter to a Seer heavy meta, and it may have taken one person to try abusing her to finally allow her to gain notoriety. As everyone should know by now, Seer's tactical reveals scanned opponents and puts her health bars over their head for 8 seconds. It also cancels any ongoing channeling abilities or animations such as healing, and briefly silences the enemy, stopping them from using their abilities. But as people noticed, especially in ranked, the accusations and molding started being thrown around, with many ranked grinders assuming that the Lifeline and the Seer interaction was a bug, and that Slayer simply was abusing said bug. And that's because not only does Lifeline hold her own against Seer's cancel, but the changes to the damage from the ring, combined with the increased closing time we got in Season 14, means that most teams will be spending a lot more time in the zone, taking health damage as they do so. Her heal drone allows you to play in zone almost forever, because while yes, the drone dies after 2 ticks, it will still manage to heal for about 30 health per member before breaking. You can also combine the drone with heat shields, allowing you to conserve your heals as you rotate in, and of course, you're always able to top yourself up with health whenever you finally get back into the ring. The fact that the package now guarantees upgrades to you or your teammates' equipment also gives your team more of a fighting chance, which is very useful in a fighting style meta. Though this part is probably more relevant in the highest echelons of Apex play, because in high-level Apex, many teams will probably go through the entire mid-game with white armors, whereas public match or ranked grinders get purple before the first ring even closes. Lifeline is just overall great for aggressive fighting teams in a fighting meta, because even if she gets cracked or takes a lot of damage, Lifeline can simply drop her drone and pop her bat at the same time, getting healed up to max health way faster than anyone else on the Apex roster. She can also play behind the drone to tank some shots if needed. Her passive did receive some changes as well, and while this isn't groundbreaking, it's worth mentioning that teammates getting revived can now cancel the rest themselves, meaning that if you're getting revived by a Lifeline, but an enemy pops out to finish you, you can manually cancel the revive and hold your shield up to stop it, or you can just do it to cover the Lifeline from getting shot herself. And if all of this wasn't enough, heads started to turn when E6 won an entire professional scrim block using Lifeline, Fuse, and Seer as a team composition. During these practice tournaments, they got a total of 102 points with 50 kills to their name. For comparison, the second place team only had 46 points with 21 kills, more than twice the difference. And as the debates raged on, October 4th, Respawn developer and game designer Jay Beebs tweeted out that the Seer tactical doesn't cancel the drone res by design. This tweet got a little bit of traction and seemed to be the catalyst for what followed, as Lifeline's pick rate has been continuing to climb steadily every single day after that, giving her an overall 11% increase in the span of a week. So, how exactly does the Lifeline work in these sweatier lobbies? You have to keep in mind that Seer has a near 100% pick rate in high ranked and in professional Apex, and the environment looks a lot more different than the average public matches. If you get knocked in the late game, you are just one of many teams still alive, and most revives will simply get cancelled by Seer's tactical. This means that having a Lifeline will almost guarantee that you get to revive your own teammates in the sweatier zones, allowing you to survive situations where you'd normally lose. And that's a pretty damn valuable component of your team composition, if you are playing aggressively and looking to harass teams. Not only that, but the Seer wasting his tactical is a huge mistake that will cost you a team fight, and seeing how getting a knock is almost always followed by Seer throwing a tactical out, that leads to that team giving away that large part of their kit for nothing. And not only that, but seeing as the Lifeline can do hands-free revives, the enemy team getting a knock on the Lifeline's team can just blindly rush in because the Lifeline can start a revive and then simply hold them off as their teammate comes back up. Wasting the Seer tactical and rushing into a team that's waiting for you is usually enough to lose most fights, which is why Lifeline is so frustrating to play against. When you're up against a Lifeline, because unless you one-clip someone without taking too much damage yourself, it doesn't matter how many knocks you get unless you knock the Lifeline, because Lifeline can just keep reviving her teammates, stalling the fight out and potentially getting the win from that alone. Her ultimate also still has some uses and will provide useful cover in the open, much like a Newcastle, but unlike Newcastle's shield wall, Lifeline's care package can't be destroyed at the cost of them taking longer to deploy and covering less area once placed. If you're tired of Seers completely denying your chance of reviving a teammate and you think a cheese pick is the solution for you, consider picking up a Lifeline as a support legend to out-sustain the opposition. But remember that just because this works for certain teams and at this very moment, that doesn't mean that Lifeline will become mainstream. She is currently only in the meta as a response to Seer's tactical and is still in any other way a much weaker version of Newcastle. If you give Lifeline a try, make sure to play her in an aggressive composition, maybe something like Lifeline Seer and Fuse like E6 was doing, but keep in mind that if everybody starts running a Lifeline, odds are that Seer's pick rate will go way down, and in such making the Lifeline pick obsolete. We might also be looking at the start of a rock, paper, scissors meta, where it comes down to what composition that you're picking versus the compositions that the rest of the servers are picking, and honestly, I'm all for it. At the risk of meta instability, I welcome players trying new compositions out and figuring out what works, with them limit testing all legends and interactions to find out what's the most efficient, because this makes Apex more interesting to follow in as an esport, but it's also more exciting to play in as a normal player, as you're up against a wider variety of team compositions and legends, keeping things fresh and interesting. Hopefully, the days of Wraith, Gibraltar, and Bloodhound are way behind us. We're currently in a period of experimentation, and we're seeing more diverse team compositions across the board, and I love to follow the meta as it evolves. I'm just hoping that we don't get stuck on a meta that's really annoying to deal with. And honestly, that's any meta that involves Seer in any capacity, and I don't think there's any way to get him out of the meta by picks alone, so personally, I'm holding out for a nerf. If you don't think the Lifeline is a pick for you, but you're interested in some underrated legends to try out, make sure to check out the video on the screen for an introduction into Mad Maggie.